Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third podcast of Lash to the Mast. As always, we will start with a prayer before study by St. Thomas Aquinas, and then we will get into the topic for the day, which is university worth it, presented by William. All right, here we go. Let's pray. Creator of all things, true source of light and wisdom, lofty origin of all being, graciously let a ray of your brilliance penetrate into the darkness of our understanding, and take from us the double darkness into which we have been born, an obscurity of both sin and ignorance. Give us a sharp sense of understanding, a retentive memory, and the ability to grasp things correctly and fundamentally. Grant us the talent of being exact in our explanations, and the ability to express ourselves with thoroughness and charm. Point out the beginning, direct the progress, and help in completion through Christ our Lord. Amen. All right. As always, we will start with a introduction. This time, instead of confirmation saints, though, we're going to do favorite mystery of the Rosary. So for me, my name is Rafael Scribola. I am currently on a medical leave of absence, but when I was at university, and I do plan on going back hopefully, I was a senior majoring in philosophy, PPE, and cognitive science at the University of Michigan. My favorite mystery of the Rosary, gosh, I would say, I want to say the Nativity because it just happened recently, but I think I gotta go with the Assumption. All right, William.
Hello, my name is William. I am majoring in philosophy and theology at Ave Maria University, and I'm a sophomore. My favorite mystery of the Rosary is after Raphael's. It's the coronation.
So wait, so
So the fifth glory.
your favorite mystery is the Assumption too?
I like. I think I prefer the coronation.
Oh, okay.
So
All
the
right.
fifth glorious mystery.
Sounds good. All right, Michael.
Hello, I'm Michael. I graduated from Thomas Aquinas College in Santa Paula, California, with a liberal arts degree, bachelor's degree, and it has a heavy emphasis in philosophy and theology, both those in particular. And my favorite mystery of the Rosary, I want to say, is the Resurrection. The
Ooh,
Resurrection will be my favorite.
That's
Yes.
a good one.
all right. All right, we'll turn it over to William now. We'll present on is university worth it?
Yeah. Yeah, so this is a very broad question, but I tried to take it a look at a bunch of different angles. Um, the first one, so I'm going to present a bunch of statistics and reasons. So the first thing I want to ask is, I wanted to ask was maintaining faith in college, and what's the statistic on people and how likely are they to remain religious during their college years? I was able to find one study on this from a Summit Ministries. Students abandoning their faith, why it happens, and what can we do? The, according to this survey, and this is so. I mean, we're all Catholics here. This one's speaking specifically about born again Christians, but I imagine there's some sort of there's not too much of a difference between religions. But according to the poll, as many as 59% of students go from identifying as born again to a different category after 4 years in college. So that's a pretty drastic number. And then, and then, according to the Higher Education Research Institute, religious attendance drops by 23% after 3 years at college, and 36% rated their spirituality lower after 3 years of college. And keep in mind, I imagine that with these polls, it's mostly secular universities. But um, another thing I want to look at, I think that with most people, the biggest concern with college is, and sending their kids to college is the indoctrination issue. So, according to this Washington Post article from 2005, so the numbers may have changed since then, but it's pretty serious numbers. 72% of professors teaching at American universities and colleges are liberal, so they identify with that title, and 15% identify as conservative. 50% associated with the Democratic Party and 11% with the Republican Party. And then at elite schools, the number is even larger. 87% of faculty are liberal and 13% are conservative. Only with regards to religion, only 31% of faculty attend church services on a regular basis. And so one question I want to know is, well, how is liberal meant here? Is it like kind of moderate or more classical liberal? Well, based on these issues, it's definitely in the more left-wing direction, especially for 2005. So 84% of those surveyed said they favor abortion rights. 67% believed homosexuality is acceptable. 88% believe in greater environmental protection, even if it raises prices or costs jobs. And 65% believe that government should ensure full-time employment. So I think actually the number I was surprised about the most was 67% believe homosexuality is acceptable because, I mean, even in the country at the time, it wasn't that acceptable to believe in homosexuality as being okay. Now, with regards to the article, the director of academic freedom, Jonathan Knight, says the number of faculty does not think that these. He basically says that he doesn't think that just because the number of faculty are liberal means that in turn the students are going to be indoctrinated. I definitely question that notion, but we can talk about that more later. So another thing I wanted to point out when discussing is university worth it is the alternatives to university, because a lot of people, when they talk about the future, they often think of college as the only option to get a job. But that's not necessarily the case. In fact, there's actually a possible better option if you're wanting to get a job that pays well. According to this Forbes article I found, trade schools versus traditional college, what you should know. The author of the article says, most people advising children do not take time to advise a trade or vocational school, quote, but it's time to change the narrative, and for more reasons than one. Not only does trade school help students land a job faster, it also costs significantly less than traditional college. Plus, jobs in trades are booming in general, whereas many other industries are oversaturated with new graduates looking for work. According to the article, trade school, and keep in mind, trade school only is typically about 2 years. It's about $5,000 a year on average, versus it says college on average is $10,000 a year. When you get into university, it's definitely a lot more than $10,000 a year. And then trade school jobs such as an electrician, plumber, and so on pay more than many college jobs. Another interesting thing about trade school is you can get an apprenticeship job while you're being trained, and you can make money while you're in school essentially, which is very unique. I found another article, and it's from psychcentral.com, and I think an important thing to note about college is it does have some social benefits as well. So the article states, I think, 7 benefits. It says these are the 7 social benefits: developing competence, managing emotions, becoming autonomous, establishing identity, and freeing interpersonal relationships, clarifying purposes, and developing integrity or wholeness. But I wanted to go off of that, and I listed some things that, from my own Catholic perspective, the things that I found beneficial about college from a more, the things from a social perspective and also just for my faith and understanding of truth, knowledge. So things that from a good Catholic college, you can build your faith, build fraternity with other like-minded Catholics, build opportunities to do new things. For example, during college, I've been able to campaign. I've been able to join the Marco Rubio campaign in turn for that. I joined a sports team. These are things I probably would not have done had I not gone to college. And another thing that I think is actually most important, besides the last thing I want to mention, is build independence in your faith and spiritual life without your parents, thus developing a more authentic faith. A lot of times when we're with our families, we just cling to the same faith they have without any self um, examination of why we believe what we believe. But I think that going to university actually can help us build our faith in that way. And then the last thing is discover truth through solid Catholic education. I think the most important thing when considering whether college is worth it, from my perspective, is will it help you be educated? It's not, going to a place like Ave Maria, Thomas Aquinas for Michael and I. It's really not. If you're wanting the best career, those aren't the best colleges. But if you're wanting a really good education, where you're going to learn, those are some of the best, in my opinion. So the question I want to ask Michael and Raphael is, do you think college is worth it? And what is your reasoning for your answer? Also, what do you think about some of those statistics?
Hmm. Let me think. Raph, I saw you wanted to talk first. Did you want to go first?
Oh, you can go ahead, Michael. Great presentation, really. By the way, that was awesome.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so so what I was thinking about is um for in terms of like is college worth it? Uh, I'll be quite I'll be frank. Uh I usually hold that question under like really tight scrutiny. I mean, more often than not, I'm also of the uh, of the of the mind that for the most part it's not really worth it unless it's very particular fields of interest that you are considering. For example, or like for example, when I went to Thomas Aquinas College, and I learned it's a liberal arts school, and what I was told, and this has turned out I think more or less correct, that those who possess a more classical liberal education have better access um, to higher fields of education and also um, like better paying like college jobs, especially if they pertain to the fields of philosophy and theology. Um, I know a few people in my own class who are continuing to university to study philosophy, especially, and then several others were also considering, we're considering the priesthood and becoming canon lawyers, for example. Both of which I think are very noble causes. Um, Other than that, if it's unless it's like if it's not a STEM field, or if it's not um, lofty fields of study like philosophy and theology, I would, if it's not those, I would probably say no, not it's not worth it. And the reasoning for that is mostly because um, it's just a personal experience. Insofar as I've studied philosophy and theology. Now, I don't. I've never been in a STEM field, but I do consider STEM fields to be very useful. And so, if you're studying for those, I consider those. I consider it worth it just because of the practicality of those fields. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's a
that
good
does.
response. Yeah, I think the STEM versus humanities distinction is another dynamic of this
Yeah.
conversation. I know for myself, like um, I'm in the humanities, right? I mean, I guess I am a little bit into economics, which I guess would count as STEM, but I'm basically in the humanities, and the grading and everything is definitely way easier than STEM fields. And I think for myself,
Right.
like I think that I am good enough to be able to go to a grad school after this and pursue a degree there, continue like a PhD or something in philosophy. But even that getting a degree like that, like you are going to be living in basically in poverty for the duration of that degree because either you don't get a stipend and then you have to like work on the side. You're doing like 60 hours a week of studying or GSIing or whatever for your class, or you're getting like maybe a very minimal stipend, like 30,000 a year or something, um, and yeah, it's just not enough to, for example, support a family or which is arguably much more, which is should be the either that or the priesthood should be the primary goal, I think, versus getting an education. I feel like getting an education is important, but I think people put college like over these more important things, family and or the priesthood. Um, so even in the humanities, if you're going to specialize in the humanities, it's really hard. Like you have to be, because everyone is going into the humanities. Competition is really fierce. You have to be, and even if you do get one of those top jobs, like it's very, you're not going to be living in very suitable conditions for raising a family. Um, so I would say it's worth it if you're going into STEM fields. I would say for most people it's not worth it if you're going into the humanities, especially if you're going to like a public school that is not Catholic or one that is like out of state and requires you to pay a ton of money. If you're not planning on going into fields like that, super specializing in that field. Um, and
Yeah.
I know at the University of Michigan, like the majority of, or not the majority, but the most popular major in the College of the Liberal Arts is psychology, and there's you're not going to be doing much with psychology. Like I'm sorry, unless your GPA is really good, there's not going to be a lot of jobs out there, and yeah, I would say the same for a lot of other degrees in the liberal arts college. Uh, and sort of going back to a lot of what William said about um, the faith and kind of touching off of what Michael said about getting a good education. The University of Michigan is supposed to be the third best school for philosophy in the country, and I'm a philosophy major there, or I was a philosophy major there, and I can say that they basically start with Descartes. Like they start in the 1500s,
Ooh, yuck.
and then go up from there. So if you want to study like philosophy from the 1500s up, yeah, sure, it's a pretty good college, but they're ignoring like basically 2000 yeah 2000 years of history before that of philosophy. I mean, they have one professor who does like ancient philosophy, and no one who does anything on Neoplatonism or the Scholastics, which is just kind of absurd in my opinion. Um, so, am I getting a good education there? I would argue, no, really, not really. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Michael got a better education at St. Thomas Aquinas than I did at the number three philosophy school in the country, just because.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you guys covered at least the basics. Um, so yeah, I don't know if that kind of connected those two
Yeah,
points, but
or at least I can honestly say that, if someone asked me if I would go back and spend 4 more years at that college, I would answer yes every time. It was I I would honestly say that it was such a good experience that I would go back and learn everything again, if not more, every time. Like go back there 4 more years and do it all over again. I would gladly do that. Um, and I also like to point out, I think that um, it seems to me that most of us are in agreement that STEM fields seem, if it's a STEM field that you're interested in, then college and higher education seems to be worth it. But a lot of, but we don't, it's not so for the humanities. And it's also, I think, a lot of the concern over indoctrination also seems to be coming from the humanities side as well.
yeah, I mean, I would say that that study that you showed William about, or you presented back in 2005, that's a pretty stunning
Yeah.
study. And yeah, I can definitely say I've experienced that firsthand in the philosophy program. There's definitely like a very big bias towards liberal ways of thinking, feminism, and even Marxism to a certain
Gag,
extent. Um,
Yeah.
gag.
yeah, like
I mean,
yeah, like we're
and that
seriously.
had
Yeah, go ahead, William.
and that I found another article, a recent one from National Review, and that study has, I mean, like the number of professors that lean that way, it has not gone down
No,
at all.
no.
It's only increased in some ways.
Yeah, I think psychology professors are like the most atheist, and I think a majority of them actually consider themselves to be atheist. And I think philosophy. I think the next might be like biologists or physicists or something like that. But I know that there's the number of philosophers who consider themselves to be either like agnostic or atheist is really
You know.
uh, bad. It's really
Yeah.
it's yeah.
Well, I
Um,
think in that survey, um, even so, religious related classes, I think 80 they were some of the most liberal professors were in like religion or philosophy
yeah,
classes.
yeah,
And um yeah, really I think the only like subsection of philosophy where you're going to find the majority of theists, which makes sense, is philosophy of religion. And they're
yeah,
probably all at Catholic universities at this point.
yeah. And I also want to go back and touch on the that one article about the born again Christians, and I think I saw something in there that they did a study of what most teenagers believe, what most like born again teenagers believe, and it's not really anything approaching Christianity. They said it was something like therapeutic deism or something like that, which deism is the idea that God sort of like created the universe, but then doesn't really like do anything to keep it up or maintain it, or he just sort of like lets it run, like a clock making winding up like a clockmaker winding up a clock. Um, so the attrition rate for people like that is really high, and I can also say um, that yeah, like 25% of the student population at the University of Michigan is ostensibly Catholic, but you don't. The number of Catholics who like actually keep up their faith is not high, and I can say from experience, like I'm part of a Catholic organization there, um, that we go out and we table and we hand out rosaries and stuff like that, and it's just amazing the amount of people that you meet who say like, oh, I'm Catholic, but I stopped going to mass once I came to college, or oh, I go to mass like I've been to mass like once a month maybe, and especially earlier in the year when the freshmen are coming in, first coming in, and so I would say like, for me, I had a really strong backing in. I was homeschooled. I had a really strong backing in the faith, uh, from in high school and before that. So I wasn't worried about losing my faith going to college. I don't think my parents were worried about me or my brother losing our faith going to college. Um, but I would say, like, if if people, for those people who do not have a strong backing, um, I am not sure they should be going to a secular university, just because, yeah, I mean, what does it profit you if you gain the world but lose your soul? What does it profit you if you get a degree but lose your soul in the process? Like, you know, and that's why I think going to Catholic colleges can be beneficial because it can reinforce the faith. But then again, is it really worth it to pay out of state tuition, most likely, for these Catholic colleges and go way into debt when you could, when you could catechize yourself in other ways? And I guess there isn't really a good catechesis program out there right now, or if there is, I don't know that I've heard of it. Um, but yeah, this is sort of a conundrum. What do we do with these students who are like barely hanging on to the faith, I guess?
Raphael, if you had the ability, assuming you don't, to just go to a Catholic university, would you?
That's a great question. I would say no. I would go back to the University of Michigan every single time. I love it there, honestly. Like, it's I'm a bit of a contrarian, I guess, maybe, but I think my faith really grew there because the Catholic community there, again, like University of Michigan, there's like 40,000 students who go there, but the Catholic community, the Catholic organization that I went to is called Catholic Student Evangelization. There's like 10 people, 10 or 11 people there out of 40,000, and we go out, we table, we hand out rosaries, and these are some of the best people I've ever met in my life. Like, they're just really on fire and really trad. Yeah, I just outed myself as a trad. Rad trad. Maybe not a rad trad, but yeah, and I started going to daily mass there too. I went to daily mass there for 14 months before COVID hit. And yeah, I loved it. I loved sort of being the only guy in the classroom who was standing up to some of these crazy ideas. I mean, we literally, like, in one class we spent a week talking about animal rights, and in the same class we talked about whether prostitution should be legalized. We talked about, you know, given even despite the fact that, like, most of the prostitution victims are like most of the women who are engaged in this are victims of human trafficking, and all of this horrible stuff about, like, well, we should open the free market to, like, everything, and it's like, no, like, what are we talking about? And then you get you it's I loved it because you got to see more what the culture is really like, and you got to see what the intellectuals of our time really think, and the Marxist backing behind it is really really great, really stunning. I mean, there's like always, I remember that in that one class there were like two very diehard Marxist students there, and yeah, there's definitely a strong presence there. Yeah, so no, I would go back every time, but I don't know. I don't know if being contrarian is a good thing.
So, I mean, if I can clarify something for a second. So, would it be more closer to the truth in your judgment that you would go back to uh, University of Michigan every single time more because your biggest interest there was, I guess I'll just say, evangelization, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, evangelization is a part of it, but also, yeah, but you have to learn the enemy, what the enemy is thinking too. So that is,
Ah,
yeah, that is also part of the evangelization, is
okay.
learning.
Okay, so it's not so much about I guess it's not so much like related to um not so much like related to uh um like secular university in general, but it's like the worth is given the fact that your intention is to understand uh opposing uh, to understand views opposing Christianity, since that is your desire and interest, um, it's it was worth it to you to be there to study mostly like how do they think and what's going on.
Yeah, I would say so. I will say that I do not have a strong back. I did not have a strong backing in like classic Catholic philosophy. Like, um, uh, so I was trying to kind of learn Catholic philosophy on the fly to try to kind of countermand what I was learning. Um, but yeah, it's the stuff that you learn is the philosophy that you learn there. The modern philosophy is pretty useful because, yeah, I mean it's what intellectuals will throw out there against Catholicism, and it doesn't seem like anyone has really been around to refute it. Like Saint Saint Thomas Aquinas came around and managed to mesh the Aristotelianism, which came from the Muslims and was seen as a threat to Catholicism. He was able to weave that in and neutralize that. You have someone like Saint Robert Bellarmine, who was able to basically go through every single Protestant argument of his time and refute it. But I feel like no one's really done that for the Enlightenment or for Marxism or for um, the current state of the current like I
Or
guess
an intellectual state of our time.
yeah, compatibilist view of human beings, that we don't really have free will, or that we're yeah, I mean, just all of these crazy views about humans. And I'm not saying like I'm the one, like I'm the chosen one to do this, but I'm just saying like you know, I want to at least be a part of that and refute like at least some of these arguments. And I feel like going to university and witnessing what these arguments are firsthand is a good way to do that. But again, like I want to work in philosophy. Like I that's what I want to do. Like if you're someone who doesn't want to do that, then I don't think you should be going into the humanities or going into a field like that if you don't want to like specialize in it later on, because there's just so many people who go to who are in the humanities just kind of blindly picking a major, like maybe changing it a couple times, and then they get out of school with a ton of debt and they don't have jobs, and it's like, yeah, I mean, they're um, what's the point there? I mean, you have a degree, but so does like everyone else. Like why don't I think William's point about trade schools is a good one. Um, yeah, sorry, I'm kind of rambling now, but um, does anyone else have opinions on this?
No, I think I'm satisfied with uh, where we're at right now. I also felt like William was wanted to say something about trade schools, I think, or wanted to get into that topic.
Yeah, shoot, William.
Well, let's see. I mean, so what do you guys would you? Because I feel like for the majority of young men, trade schools, and if I wasn't interested in the current path I'm on as much as I am, this is probably what I would be doing. I feel like the majority of young men should definitely consider trade school over university. Would you guys agree?
I would agree with that, unless they're going into STEM fields like engineering or something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I guess pretty much the same. Or I guess perhaps if you're something like Raf or myself, where or even you, William, who people who are they know they want to study philosophy. They're more of the they want to be the sort of a brainiac type when it comes to humanities such as philosophy or even theology. It's like unless you have that, it's trade school a seems to offer a pretty good deal.
Yeah, I mean and I think in the podcast description, hopefully Raphael can include these links.
Yes, yeah,
I mean
definitely.
the this the amount of money you make as an electrician or a plumber, it's just crazy. It's like
Yes,
$70,000 a year.
yeah,
It's like right out of the trade school. Like that's really good, and you can from that you can also go on and start a business. 'Cause
yeah.
I mean, there's a great need for it too. So if there's a young men listening to this podcast and are, thinking about it, it's definitely a career path I recommend. I know a few of the guys from that Raphael and I have ultra served with at our church are actually choosing trade school over
Oh,
going to college or university. So
yeah, that's awesome.
yeah.
Um, yeah, like, dang it, I had something I was gonna say. Um, oh yeah, I would also say to young men out there, like, put your family, your future family first. Or if you're going to the priesthood, then think about that. But but
Yes.
but think about like a job, or think about what you're doing and how it will help you um, to nurture your family or support your family. There we go. Financially support your family, so you can live a good life. Like, I feel like that consideration should be paramount, as and should inform the decision about what you do in terms of college and trade school and all of that. All right. Well, with that, let's turn it back over to the uh, presentation section on the role of the church and state together, otherwise known as the Gelasian Dyarchy. So for last time, we looked at a bunch of papal quotes reinforcing the Gelasian Dyarchy, and this time we'll look at what St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Robert Bellarmine had to say on it. And actually, I kind of wish that I had looked through St. Robert Bellarmine's Controversies of the Christian Faith before presenting all of the popes, because he actually himself quotes all of, like, a bunch of these popes. Like, he quotes Gelasius the First, he quotes Gregory the Seventh, I think. He quotes Innocent the Third, who we hadn't talked about. So yeah, he definitely a lot more in Controversies of the Christian Faith by St. Robert Bellarmine that informs the discussion and goes beyond what I'm going to say from him here. All right, but Let's start with St. Thomas Aquinas. If you aren't aware of St. Thomas Aquinas, he is probably the foremost philosopher um, for Catholicism. Um, he lived in the 13th century, and yeah, he was just, like, numerous popes and have lauded him on his teaching, and so yeah, he's definitely a go-to guy for these kinds of things. All right, so um, if we go back to the distinction between nature and grace that we mentioned earlier, we will remember the contrast between Aristotle's position of temporal happiness attained by virtuous living within the polis and the happiness attained in the beatific vision, a happiness which can only be achieved in the next life. And I also mentioned earlier how man's temporal end is perfected and elevated by his eternal end. And here's what St. Thomas Aquinas' argument, starting with two seemingly contrasting accounts of human happiness. Quote, "Now man's happiness is twofold, as was also stated above. One is proportionate to human nature, the other is a happiness surpassing man's nature, and which man can obtain by the power of God alone. And because such happiness surpasses the capacity of human nature, man's natural principles do not suffice to direct man to this same happiness. Therefore, because man's eternal happiness can only be attained through God's help alone," pretty drastic statement there are political ramifications to this statement. He says in De Regno, "Since society must have the same end as the individual man, it is not the ultimate end of an assembled multitude to live virtuously, but through virtuous living to attain to the possession of God." So what he's kind of saying here is the point of living isn't to drive the car. The point of living is to get to the place where the car is driving. Um, and I really love what he says here about the society needing to have the same end as the individual man. Because the society is kind of built from the ground up and has the responsibility to watch over the individual man and his family specifically. Um, Thus, the version of temporal happiness laid out by Aristotle is necessary. So that is the assembled multitude living virtuously, that is necessary but not sufficient for man's eternal happiness. Therefore, society ought to be subject to the power of the church, who alone can bring the grace necessary for salvation to the polis. Remember, we can only obtain the beatific vision through God's help alone, and the church is the vehicle by which we obtain God's help. Here's St. Thomas Aquinas' quote from De Regno, also from De Regno. Thus, in order that spiritual things might be distinguished from earthly things, the ministry of this kingdom has been entrusted not to earthly kings but to priests, and most of all to the chief priest, the successor of St. Peter, the vicar of Christ, the Roman pontiff. To him all kings of the Christian people are to be subject as to our Lord Jesus Christ himself. For those to whom pertains the care of intermediate ends should be subject to him to whom pertains the care of the ultimate end, and be directed by his rule. However, we have the church once again over the temporal end, but the temporal still has its own legitimate sphere. And this is a kind of long quote from Sentences, but he's in this quote he's going to be talking about how the difference between a monarchy and diarchy, in the sense of the temporal end doesn't derive its power or legitimacy through the spiritual end, but rather by God alone, and then God arranges those two powers next to each other. He arranges those two powers and the relationship between them, kind of like a sun to the moon. So here's his quote. There are two ways in which a higher power and a lower can be related. In one way, the lower power may be completely derived from the higher, and the whole power of the lower will then be founded upon the power of the higher, in which case we should obey the higher power before the lower simply and in all things. In another way, a higher and lower power can be such that each arises from some supreme power which arranges them in relation to each other as it wishes. In this case, the one will not be subject to the other save in respect of those things in which it has been subjected to the other by the supreme power, and only in such things are we to obey the higher power before the lower. Spiritual and secular power are both derived from the divine power, and so secular power is subject to spiritual power insofar as this is ordered by God, that is, in those things which pertain to the salvation of the soul. In such matters, then, the spiritual power is to be obeyed before the secular, but in those things which pertain to the civil good, the secular power should be obeyed before the spiritual, according to Matthew chapter 22, verse 21, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. Alright, so we see St. Thomas Aquinas affirming this doctrine of Gelasian Dyarchy. I don't know if you could call it a doctrine, but I guess this view of the Gelasian Dyarchy. Alright, now we turn to St. Robert Bellarmine in the 16th century, so 1500s. St. Thomas Aquinas was in the 1200s. And St. Robert Bellarmine was a prolific writer of his time, part of the Counter-Reformation, wrote against he wrote a book. He wrote 3 books called Controversies of the Christian Faith, and in each one he refutes a bunch of Protestant arguments from his time. And this is from the third one of those. Okay, so we see a similar theme here. So, quote, the third opinion is in the middle and is held commonly by Catholic theologians, namely, that the pontiff as pontiff does not have any temporal power directly and immediately, but only spiritual power. However, by reason of the spiritual, at least indirectly, he has some power, and it is supreme in temporal matters. So we see once again that that the spiritual is over the temporal, even though it doesn't have complete control over temporal matters. Alright, so he lays out a plan to go through this, and he says, first we will show that the pontiff by divine right does not have temporal power directly. Second, he does have in some sense, that is, by reason of his spiritual monarchy, supreme power that is also temporal. Alright, great. We see that St. Robert Bellarmine agrees with the Gelasian Dyarchy, but let's go through his reasons for doing so. On the first point, St. Robert Bellarmine argues both that the Pope is not Lord of the world, and that he is not Lord of the world, Lord of the whole Christian world. The reason the Pope is not Lord of the whole world is that he has only been given the right to rule over Christians, not pagans or Muslims. Thus, if the whole world were converted to Christianity, The Pope would be Lord of the world indirectly, but still not directly, since he would be Lord of the world only insofar as everyone is Catholic. The reason why the Pope is not Lord over the whole Christian world is because Christ did not give the keys of the earthly kingdoms to Peter, but only those of the church. And because Christ did not come to take away kingdoms from where they belong, but to perfect them. So we see kind of this theme again of grace perfecting nature, or the spiritual perfecting the temporal, but not displacing it. Despite this lack of direct authority over the temporal realm, though, St. Robert Bellarmine argues that the Church still has indirect authority, since the temporal power must be subordinated to the spiritual power. And he says, quote, this is going to be a really long quote, so just bear with me here. We are saying that the pontiff as pontiff, although he does not have any purely temporal power, still has, in reference to the spiritual good, the supreme power of managing the temporal affairs of all Christians. And this is a great analogy that he's about to give here. For just as there are in man both spirit and flesh, so also there are in the Church those two powers. For spirit and flesh are like two states which can be found to be both separate and joined. The flesh has sensation and appetites, to which certain acts and proportionate objects correspond, whose immediate end is the health and a good constitution of the body. The spirit has intellect and will, and acts and proportionate objects, and for its end the health and perfection of the soul. Flesh is found without spirit in brute animals, and spirit is found without flesh in the angels. From this, it appears that neither is precisely because of the other. Flesh is found also joined to the spirit in man, where, because they make one person, necessarily they have subordination and connection, for the flesh is subject and the spirit presides. Thus, purely political power, and similarly the ecclesiastical, when they are joined together, they make one body, and therefore they must be connected with the lower, subjected to and subordinated to the higher. Alright, that is everything from St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Robert Bellarmine, so I'll turn it over to the floor to be discussed. If you guys want me to go over anything, I'd be happy to do that as well.
So I guess during all of that, I did have one question about so how do we in light of all this, how do we interpret, say for example, we use scripture a bit, so I'll try to use scripture here. When Christ tells Peter, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. So, like, what sort of authority is being referenced here in scripture in light of what we're saying?
So I think for that particular quote, I think the interpretation would be that the Pope is like physically in the world, and so whenever to bind things and loose things, he needs to do that in a temporal way in the world. So whatever he does in the world in that way is also bound in heaven. So I think it's just it's more of a narrow interpretation, that he's just he's on earth basically. It's not like the Old Testament where God speaks directly out of a cloud and people then follow that. The Pope has been given that not that sort of power, but he's been given power over his own subjects to rule them. And I think there's a quote from scripture that Robert Bellarmine says to show that the Pope's authority is only over Christians. I don't think I'm remembering it at the moment, but here, let me see if I can find it. Okay. Yeah, I think he. Let me see here.
If only Jesuits were still like Bellarmine.
Yeah. Yeah, oof. I'm not finding it, but I think there's some. It's like somewhere in Corinthians or something like that, where uh, he says that Saint Paul says that only the Christians, that the Pope only has jurisdiction over the Christians or something like that, or it's interpreted that way. Um, yeah, I mean, and all of the I think Saint Robert Bellarmine argues that um, there is no interpretation of the scriptures from the church fathers and the popes, uh, contrary to this sort of narrow interpretation of that verse, and therefore uh, that interpretation is to be favored. I guess I don't know. Does that make sense?
I guess it makes sense, or at least I suppose that explanation satisfies for the moment.
Okay. Yeah, I can keep looking, and then if I find it, I can post it in the description or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't
No,
find
that
that exact quote.
yeah, that's no, that's fine. Other than that, I'm satisfied with where we're at, so I don't have any more questions.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I can go over things too if people were confused, because I went over things kind of hurriedly because there was a lot to go over, and then I sort of yeah, I should have gone a little slower. William, do you have anything?
No, I don't know. I just that's a I think it's just a very interesting position, that the Pope has this spiritual authority over he doesn't he has it over Christians, but and that he can manage in a temporal sense, but it's not total,
Yeah.
from my understanding.
Yeah.
Because he's not lord over the entire earth, right?
Yeah.
World. And that's I don't know, it's just a very interesting idea. And this is kind of why I like Bellarmine. He has
Yeah.
all these um he has all these clarifications and like just ideas that I don't think you can find in too many other people. Um
Yeah, and his knowledge of scripture and the um, like writers before him is just insane. Like
yeah.
I can go, like I can go back to the first part of this, where he says, I quoted this in the thing, but I can quote it like longer, where he quotes like everyone who supports it. Okay, the third opinion is in the middle and is held commonly by Catholic theologians, namely that the pontiff as pontiff does not have any temporal power directly and immediately, but only spiritual power. However, by reason of the spiritual, at least indirectly, he has some power, and is supreme in temporal matters, which, by the way, is a great summary of the Gelasian Dyarchy. And then he says, thus, Hugo of St. Victor in Book 2, Part 2, Chapter 4 in the Sacraments, whom Alexander of Hales follows in 3 paragraph Summa question 40 M5 and 4 paragraph question 10 in his explanation of the canon of the Mass, and for any king likewise, St. Bonaventure in his book on the ecclesiastical hierarchy, Durandus in his book oh, that's a typo, in his book on the origin of jurisdiction, Peter of Aliaco in the question of whether the Church of Peter is confirmed in the faith, John of Paris in the treatise on royal and papal power, Jacob Alomar in the treatise on supreme power of the Church, Gabriel Biel in his explanation of the canon of the Mass, Henry of Gandalvo in Quod Libet, John Driedo in Book 2 on the freedom of Christ, John A. Cremata in Book 2 of his Summa, Albert Pigius in Book 5 on the hierarchy of the Church, Thomas Waldensis in Book 2 on the teaching of the faith, Peter of Palud in his book on the power of the Church, Cajetan in the Apology, Francis Victoria in Reprisal on the power of the Church, Dominic A. Soto in 4 Dis 25, question 2 at 1, Article 1 or something like that, Nicholas Sanduris in Book 2 on the visible monarchy, Anthony of Cordova in Book 1, and many others. So he just like
Yeah.
lists like 15 people, and then he's like, okay, I'm done listing. Like
Yeah.
you could just
That's
keep.
one of the that's one of the times when the professor grading your paper might allow you to just say, and many others.
So,
Yeah,
yeah, so it's like,
yeah, but I mean,
uh,
yeah, just his scope of knowledge has to rival that of Saint Thomas.
yeah, it's
Um, and
yeah,
also because he has access to so many of these theologians and philosophers that Saint Thomas probably did not have.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
it's just crazy.
Definitely makes me feel inferior and
Mhm.
lazy. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
uh, yeah. I love how he uses the term like "Lord of the whole world" too. That's kind of a cool phrase.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, any other questions or comments, concerns on this or anything else?
I am. There's nothing
Not.
for.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just said there's nothing that I wish to comment on.
Oh, likewise.
Okay. Well, in that case, we will turn to the random number generator to determine what the object of the next episode will be. So I have 3 questions. William has 2. All right, here we go. I'm gonna press it in 3, 2, 1. Oh, it's 1. It's me. Let me see what this question is. Oh, okay. This is gonna be a good one. Is gambling a sin? All right.
Ooh.
Uh, with Michael's great experience with gambling, this should be a good one.
Excuse me.
And William's gambling of his body and with Donald.
Yeah. And, in video games.
Yeah, in video games. Yeah, so
Yeah,
uh,
it's
we will definitely tune in to see that one next time. All right, well, I think that pretty much wraps it up for this episode. So yeah, thank you all for tuning in and making it this far, and hopefully you got something out of it. And yeah, if you go to university after this, then we will come and find you. No,
yeah.
just kidding. Um,
Or if you go to trade school because of this, let us
yeah,
know.
yeah. Let us know if you go to trade school because of this. That would be awesome. Um, all right. Well, with that, I'll send everyone off. All right. God bless.